Welcome all to the overview of the NTIA Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. You are in the right place to learn more about this exciting opportunity we have to bring money into Nevada to support digital equity initiatives. My name is Jessica Parker. I am the Digital Equity Director for the Nevada Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, or shorter, OSIT. Because let's face it, Nevada Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology is a mouthful. This document, this webinar, is really intended to help applicants to this program to better understand the information in the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program and the requirements set forth in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and all of the follow-on policies and guidance that NTIA has provided. It does not supersede. It's not intended to supersede it either, modify, or otherwise alter applicable statutory or regulatory requirements, the terms and conditions of the award, or specific application requirements set forth in the NOFO. In all cases, statutory and regulatory mandates, the terms and conditions of the award, the requirements set forth in the NOFO, and follow-on policies and guidance shall prevail over any inconsistencies contained in this document. This is my opinion, and this is information I'm sharing, but it is not superseding anything from NTIA. They are the authorities. So for housekeeping, you can type questions into the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. We will also have time for Q&A after the presentation. This presentation and the slides will be available on the OSIT website after this is recorded. Our objectives really are to supplement, not supplant, information from NTIA, and we're going to cover items that require advanced planning or might be unclear because we've navigated some of these processes before and figure we can share. We're going to focus on the competitive grant program and provide you with resources and tips. The Internet for All is the website you might see. Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program by NTIA. Department of Commerce is involved as well. We're looking at a screenshot from the grant application portal right now. So the portal itself is an application interface where everybody who's applying for the competitive grant will go into the NTIA Grants Portal, or NGP for short. When you go into the portal, it will be divided into these 8 sections. And these are the sections you'll go into to complete the application online. The first section is the general applicant information. This hyperlink goes to the webinar that NTIA provided with a lot of detail about this section. So for more information, you can use this hyperlink to go view that webinar and the slides. Some things to keep in mind. Each entity needs an active registration on sam.gov. So that's not just the entity that's applying, but all of the partner organizations. If you haven't updated it annually, keep in mind you do need to update annually the information that sam.gov has for your organization. This includes general certifications and representations for each organization on sam.gov. Any new entities will need to request a unique entity ID. Sometimes it takes 3 days. Great, that doesn't take very long. Sometimes it can take more than 3 weeks. If you haven't requested one and you're looking at federal grant opportunities, you might want to get that submitted as soon as possible. And for every entity who's part of the partnership, you want to make sure that every entity is in good standing, so they're not disbarred or suspended, and there's an actual list that you can view on sam.gov. The authorized recipient, that's the organization that's going to be completing the application, they will need to upload evidence verifying the status as an eligible entity for the grant. And these are some examples of that evidence. So that's a file upload that they will need to provide. So if you need to go get those documents, you might want to start making sure you've got those in order now rather than waiting till the day you try to apply. One of the things in that general applicant is the AR experience. So the applying representative needs to demonstrate in 2,500 characters or less. They say it's about 500 words. I'm not entirely sure. It depends on how short your words are. But a space counts as a character. You're going to want to really be concise as well as being detailed to demonstrate that evidence of experience managing similar partnerships or coalitions and the plans to ensure ongoing collaboration. This is information that the applicant must submit, and this is the character limit. They want detail, but you need to be concise because it's really not a lot of space. For partnerships, they must demonstrate the ability to administer the resources and address the concerns of the covered populations. They're looking at making sure that these partnerships are specifically tied to those local representatives, that they're reaching the local community members. That's very important. The authorized representative does need to submit on behalf of the partnership, including a binding letter of commitment from each member. And that's a file upload that they must submit. Some organizations require board approval for this type of thing. Again, so lead time is needed. An entity can be part of multiple partnerships. For example, one organization might apply with United Way of Northern Nevada and United Way of Southern Nevada because they serve the entire state. Partner organizations will need to provide information back to that authorized representative, including their UEI number, evidence verifying their status as an eligible entity. So it might be their business license, their nonprofit disclosures, all of that information, and whether or not they've applied for any other funding. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're looking to apply as a partner for multiple applications, you need to disclose that to the authorized representative for each, as well as provide that letter of commitment. This is all the information the authorized representative needs to gather from every partner. So they're looking at the legal name, the legal identifiers, the entity type, the role, again, involvement in any other applications, how much funding they're going to need, what the contribution is to the match, point of contact name, phone number, email address, and physical address. The authorized representative will fill this all out in a spreadsheet and upload that file as part of the application process. Specific to native entities, there is a native entity set aside, and the applicant or authorized representative must be a native entity. They need the tribal government resolution or equivalent authorization to apply for the competitive grant funds. So that would be a file to upload. This is something that I would expect requires some lead time. So thinking about getting that going sooner rather than later. Also, a certification that all intended beneficiaries are members of a native entity. It's very specific for that native entity set aside. The next section we're going to look at is the project narrative. And this is because it's the order in the application that's the order we're going to look at the information. NTIA provided some hypothetical project examples of perhaps a not so good project to use and a more appropriate project for this grant funding. Short-term projects just that is one time solving an immediate need, but when the funding runs out, the hole remains. A better choice would be to find that long-term project that might provide devices over time and something that is sustainable, ongoing. You want to think about that kind of project. These are examples that NTIA provided in one of their blog posts. The executive summary. There's a lot of information they want in the executive summary. Each of these 10 items must be addressed. And if you are filling this out, try to use their wording and be as clear as possible. This is an overview of the goals of this project. These are the specific barriers to digital equity. Use their wording, their language, You will have to, again, be concise because you have 7,500 characters. This is a difference in the field size for this particular item. Yes, spaces will still count in your character total. You need a lot of detail for the timeline. A little later on in the slide deck, there is a suggestion from NTIA on the timeline to use. So that should help in terms of when to expect or to project start and finish within that 4 years period of performance. If you can get it done faster, even better, I suppose. But all of this detail must be addressed. Make sure it's like a checklist. Make sure all 10 items are clearly addressed. If you want to talk about the baseline assessment, say the baseline assessment with supporting data will be, and you want to be that specific. Some of the scanning might initially be done by a tool or by an outside party to help them deal with the volume of requests they might get. So keep in mind, be very specific, use their language whenever possible. For environment and historical preservation, if you're not proposing any construction, ground disturbance, or installation of fixed equipment, you can skip this section, which is nice. However, if you do have, maybe you're building a computer lab and you need to use a portable building, I don't know, you would need to upload the files as requested and make sure that the information is consistent in the project description form because there are similar fields there also. For activities and interventions, there's a project description form. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's a file upload. They recommend no more than 2,500 characters per field. Again, you want to be concise and detailed. It's a challenge. For calculating covered population served, NTIA has provided a formula in their guidance document. And there's a link here for that. For the purposes of this particular form, they talk about a subgrantee. In this case, they're talking about the partner organizations. You want to make sure that the information is consistent between other sections of the application and the information on this project description form. You want to cross-check and make sure it's the same everywhere. Your proposed project start and end dates should align with the anticipated project period of performance, which NTIA has provided in their slide 13 of their competitive program application training part 1 slide deck. And again, this is a link to that document. So this is their projected period of performance, anticipated. You can use that and use the same language, anticipated project period of performance. Then that way you're consistent and it's clear. For the project plan, that's an additional file upload. They have not provided a template. You want to make sure you're identifying your key milestones that demonstrate progress. They want to know, hey, when I've accomplished something, I can prove it. I've moved forward and I know I've moved forward. I know I'm on track because we got this done. We reached this milestone. So you want to be clear and include that information. Again, it needs to be consistent with the project description form and other sections of the application. The timeline needs to align with the consolidated budget form. So if you're anticipating purchasing something in the second quarter, your project description form should show that milestone. The project plan should show that milestone, and the budget should show that expenditure. You want to make sure everything is consistent across those documents and that it's clearly supporting each other. You also need to include a risk management plan and activities, and this is distinct from the scenario and risk mitigation plan. So the risk management plan is what could possibly go wrong and what are we going to do to prevent it or course correct if it happens. The next section is the budget section. I'm putting in a plug here for their webinar today at 1 p.m. They will have a budget webinar where they will go through the budget spreadsheet. If you are responsible for the budget spreadsheet or someone in your organization is, I encourage you strongly to get to that webinar. It will be recorded so you can view it afterwards as well. But if you've got questions that you want answered about the budget, this might be a great opportunity to get that answered. For budget notes, the grants will range from 5 to 12 million. Outside that range, they said in a previous webinar about 1 million would be the lowest they'd want to go. But outside that range, you must provide a compelling justification for why you're asking for funding that's either below or above that range. A 10% match is required, but it can be in kind. And there is a waiver available. It's an option. Extra points will be awarded to applicants that have a 20 or 30% match. So you get a point at 20% and another point at 30. If you're at 25%, you don't get any, you get the 20% point, but you don't get anything extra above that. So if you're able to do a 20% or 30% match, that will increase the point score, weighting it in a positive direction during the evaluation process. There are funding caps. Those funding caps are based on the total program costs, that is the grant plus the match. So if your total funding cost is $7 million, you need to make sure that 10% is not exceeded for administration costs. And those administration costs are not directly related to the provision of program activities and must be explicitly identified on the budget form. That doesn't mean you can just say, oh, hey, I'm going to take 10% and call it administration, and then that's good. You actually have to provide detail. What are you doing with those dollars to explain why you need to use funding towards administration costs if you're using that cap? There's also an additional 10% for program evaluation. Again, it has to be explicitly identified and spelled out on your budget form. What are you doing with it? And they're talking about down to the roles. All subrecipients, subgrantees, partners must be identified at the time of application. You can't do that later. Within the budget considerations, I reached out to our department expert, and she kindly shared these tips. Use their spreadsheet, their formatting, their terminology. Double check the formulas. Occasionally, some of the automated formulas aren't set up quite right, or if you insert a cell, it might shift the formula. So you'll want to double check that when you're done. Understand the funding requirements and rules in the NOFO, and yes, Part 2 CFR 200. Direct versus indirect expenses, cost allocation, performance begin and end dates, travel rules, equipment versus supplies and materials. You want to understand what are all the rules around that. You want to submit realistic cost estimates and show how they were calculated. You need to provide that level of detail. This role, this hourly rate, this for this work. That's the level of detail that we've had to provide. You want to make sure that the grant narrative and the budget match, including what programmatic aspects and budget will cover. NTIA may request manuals for internal and subrecipient control, work process systems, organizational charts, program implementation plans, etc. They may. They only give you one round of curing, so they would ask for it pretty quickly. But they might ask for those things, so you'd want to have those available. And understand how to ask for budget modification if the projected costs change. This one I'm hoping they're going to speak to today on their budget webinar, because that would be something pretty vital to know. All right, applicant capability. In 2,500 characters or less, and again, a space counts as a character, you get to describe each of these four things. Structure, evidence of the financial capacity and stability of the organization to implement the project. The team, its experience managing similar work. The applicant's experience providing services. All of this must be described in each of 4 different fields. Again, that 2,500 characters, they want detail, but concise. They're also looking for resumes of key personnel. So you'll need to identify up to 5 people from the authorized representative, just the AR, not the partner organizations. And you'll upload a 1-page resume for each person. They will ignore anything over 1 page. So whatever you want to say, you need to fit it onto a single page. Project information. See, the last one was nice and short. This is where you're going to upload a file for your scenario and risk mitigation plan. This is a little different than your project risk management plan. This is specifically about describing the steps taken to ensure that any deployment of technology will not have adverse consequences for the covered populations. And they provide some examples like privacy protections, algorithmic biases, etc. You need to clearly outline it with a step-by-step plan. And if for some reason you think this is not applicable, you need to justify it. For example, if you're going to provide devices, you want to talk about mitigating risk by also helping them with tech support, antivirus, digital skills training, digital cybersecurity training, so that they understand how to protect themselves and their data online. There's also a data stewardship plan. And this one is a plan that includes a technology impact assessment. And you want to talk about the data collection. There's a lot of reporting required for this particular program. In order to report on information, you're going to have to collect data. This may tie back to your evaluation strategies and plan. From the application guidance, this is what NTIA has provided in terms of strategies and timelines for data collection and analysis. They want to know, what are you collecting and when are you analyzing it and what are you going to report on it? Also, how are you keeping that data safe? In addition, human subject research requirements apply, so you want to make sure that you're appropriately providing protection for human subjects. They've communicated that guidance will be forthcoming. For folks who have done any academic research, think about the same human subject requirements for research that you might have as part of an institutional review board. If you need more information about that, I've got some context because I am working on my doctorate. For sustainability, you have to upload a file containing strategies to be undertaken to ensure that the project or activity will be sustainable long-term. They don't want a one and done. Because if you do it today and it doesn't continue tomorrow, then it's not sustainable. And that's really critical because we're trying to close the digital divide, and closing it temporarily doesn't alleviate the problem. Solving the problem really is what they're going for. And that's really key. So you want to consider that sustainability and then how you're assessing it and proving your point that there have been long-term impacts, which means your assessment, the previous item, needs to include, hey, we're going to ask people when we meet with them after we've given them a device, and we're going to check back in with them 6 months, a year later to see how that's impacted things. That's an example. It's something to think about, and it is requiring a lot of think ahead time, at least in my worldview. The match. This is a short and sweet section. In-kind match may include volunteer hours, and someone had found this wonderful value of volunteer time report. If you're not sure how to calculate what a volunteer time hour is worth, you can go out to this link and select the information for Nevada, and you can get that hourly rate to use for calculation. And then you have support, and you can cite the source as, this is how we calculated the number. We didn't just make something up. In the match source, you have to provide the source of any matching funds and the amount in 2,500 characters. And yes, spaces are still included in that limit. So for other funding sources, they want to make sure that you're not using other federal funding sources for activities or project related to this application. So if you're doing a project that this is what you're applying for. I'm going to do this work with the funds from the competitive grant. You cannot use other federal funds to fund the person writing the application or to fund the same work. They want to make sure it's clear and delineated. All right, we're getting down to the certifications and assurances. These are pretty straightforward. There's a PDF fillable form in the application package that you can go through to make sure you've got all the information. They've provided instructions, and here's a link to where those are. All information will need to be copied into the NTIA grants portal, the NGP, by the authorized organization representative, the person filling it out. Nevada has a particular rule because this application is subject to review by state under Executive Order 12372 process. And what you'll put in is, it's question 19. You'll select option A and you'll provide that date the form was submitted. And that link will take you to the Office of Federal Assistance form where you will fill out the information requested. They need 2 business days to review it. You don't necessarily have to have your complete application done when you provide that information to OFA. So you'll want to look at that form and figure out, oh, okay, I could submit this now. And then that way the Office of Federal Assistance has a chance to look that over. And there are lobbying standard forms. So there's a certificate regarding lobbying, basically saying you're not using these funds to lobby folks. There is a disclosure of lobbying activities if there are lobbying activities that your organization performs. NTIA has provided detailed instructions on pages 16 to 17 of the document link. There's also a negotiated indirect cost rate. If you have indirect costs, you have a NICRA already identified with NTIA, that's great. If you do not have a NICRA with NTIA specifically, plan to use the de minimis rate because obtaining a NICRA can take up to 180 days and you've got less than 30 to get this application done. There are updates from an April 22nd update of this year for Part 2 CFR 200 and specifically 89 FR 346 has updates that talk about the changes to the calculation of the de minimis rate. Make sure you look at that. Resources and tips. Your authorized organization representative can register right now for the grants portal. It opened on August 14th. You want to register now to make sure you can get your access seamlessly. You can log in, that it seems to work correctly for you because it's technology and sometimes technology doesn't work. You want to make sure to do that early rather than wait to the last minute. Read the notice of funding opportunity super carefully. There's a lot of information in there. I know it can be overwhelming. You want to read it carefully because it spells out what's needed. The NTIA recorded webinars for the competitive grant program provide a lot of really useful information. Watch those, attend the ones you can, but you can always watch the recording later. So if you can't make it schedule-wise, the recording will be available. There's slides that are also available to download and look through. Access all that information. It's all there to help you be more successful. They also have other documentation like the application guidance, the frequently asked questions, review it all. Sometimes there are questions that are a little nuanced. Like I wasn't clear in the documentation if the covered households, when they specifically talk about covered households, is it all covered populations or is it just the covered households group of covered populations, which are those households that are at or below 150% of the poverty line? In statute, covered households are at or below 150% of the poverty line. And whenever it says covered households, that's what they're referring to. It's consistent. You want to draft that content in a document. So for example, a tool like Microsoft Word will allow you to highlight and count your characters and gives you an opportunity to check spelling as well. But also with any computer situation, there can be glitches. So if you have it all in a document, you can copy and paste it from the document into the NTIA grants portal. That means if something happens, you don't lose all your work and have to start over. It also gives you a backup place in case your internet connection goes down in the middle of going through the process. Anything can happen. And if you're prepared for the worst, it's far less painful. Think of it as risk management. Formatting doesn't carry over into the NGP fields. So if you've got a bulleted list in your Word document or whatever you're drafting the information in, and you go to paste it, those bullets won't carry over. Or if your document information is in a table, the table will not, it's a text field. It's like working in Notepad. There's only text. Bold won't show up, underlining won't show up. So think about that and how you're formatting the information for readability. And then when information is in multiple locations, make sure it's consistent. It matters. Inconsistencies pop up as a red flag to somebody reading information. Spell check your text, even in spreadsheets. I know it sounds silly. However, if you're reading something that has a lot of typos or spelling errors, you're going to think less of it, especially at this level. Don't wait until the last minute to submit your application. I talked to one person who submitted their grant application about 3 hours before the deadline for the capacity grant, and they were having issues. They got notified about the issues about 2 hours later, so they had just 1 hour to drive home and frantically re-upload a file because for some reason it didn't get uploaded right the first time. Take the time, give yourself time so that you can do it in advance. And then keep in mind as you're going through all this, it's a huge amount of work. However, there's so many benefits to the people we're serving. The beautiful thing will be that we are making a difference in people's lives. And when we focus on that, that helps make the documentation perhaps a little bit more palatable. And that was a tip from my colleague as well. And I will get to your question in a sec, AJ. Here's some other resources. One of the questions that gets asked is percentage of covered populations. Well, how am I supposed to know? Good news. The US Census has a Digital Equity Act population viewer. And for Nevada, you can drill down to the census tract level to get to that geographic area. So if you're looking for a geographic area where greater than or equal to 50% of the households are covered households, you can find that area. You can also find all the other covered populations for every census tract in the entire state. So you can go look at that information and it will be available to you. So again, that link is here. I've also shared some projects that other states have done to give you some ideas. So if you're not quite sure how you want to structure your project or what you're trying to do, you've got an idea of, I want to do this thing, but I'm not sure how to word it. I've provided some examples of digital equity projects from the states of North Carolina and Ohio. And again, these are just examples, and there's links so that you can see additional ones. OSIT, we have resources for you too. Nevada's Digital Equity Plan is on our website. There's a link on the Digital Equity webpage so that you can subscribe to the listserv. That will get you notifications about webinars like this, as well as information once we're ready to release the Digital Equity Capacity Grant request for applications, which will happen in the fall-winter timeframe. We have a partnership finder so you can connect to each other and find organizations that are working on these programs. Working as a group is going to help be successful with this particular grant program. We also have a mapping portal that has information about connectivity, digital divide, covered populations. And at the very bottom of it, a link to the Digital Equity Act viewer. State broadband offices, including OSIT, are not eligible we can't apply for this particular grant. And we can support a limited number of applications if you provide us some information, give us some time, and you're meeting a gap identified in our plan. More resources. The Office of Federal Assistance is here to help organizations apply for federal grants. They've got a resource library, they've got training. They're here to help. And here's their contact information. NTIA has a ton of information. They have the Notice of Funding Opportunity, they have a web page, they have another web page. So they have one on Broadband USA that's got some information, including upcoming NTIA webinars and the application package. And the Internet for All Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program webpage has additional information. It's got an overview of eligible entities, downloadable technical assistance documentation. There's application guidance, and you can email questions to their mailbox. They will either respond to you if they can. A lot of times it will be that you see an update in the FAQs document rather than a direct response because they cannot respond to everybody. And if you're having problems with the portal, they've got a help desk that you can email. You can expect that that's not going to be instant response. Again, while you want to get into that portal, make sure you've got access sooner rather than later. All right, we have hit the questions portion. So I am going to stop the recording and we'll take